Thank you very much for attending our program this evening. I'm Jane Lang. I'm the director of the Neenah Historical Society. We're very happy that you're here. Very happy to see so many Presbyterians here. That's great. I just want to give a couple of announcements. Our program next month will be on March 16th. It will be a presentation on Galloway Company's history, along with the history of the Neenah Dairy Queen and their partnership together. So that should be a lot of fun. And then April 20th, our program will be Life in Neenah's Progressive Era by Professor Steve Sheehan, and that will be kind of an overview of our upcoming exhibit that will be opening the first weekend in May, that is called Making a Hometown, Life in Neenah's Progressive Era. I apologize for my croaky voice, but I'm going to now introduce our speaker for tonight, Jack's speech. Jack and his wonderful wife, Joyce, came to Neenah in 1967 when he joined radio station WNAM as operations manager. He left WNAM in 1972 when the station was sold and the on-the-air staff were all fired, Jack included. After 18 years in broadcasting, Jack says he had to find real work, and he joined Kimberly Clark in public relations. Later, he joined a new department at KC, Communication Services, where as manager of photographic and audiovisual services, he produced sales meetings for the company, traveling the country, introducing new products to the sales force and to KC customers. Jack retired from KC in 1995. He is a lifelong Presbyterian, a member of the National Trust for Historic Preservation, a member of the Wisconsin Historical Society, as well as the Neenah and Menasha Historical Societies. He is also a member, with me, on the Neenah Landmarks Commission for Historic Preservation. So please help me welcome Jack.
Can you hear me when I tuck this under here? Well, I'll do this. I want my handy mover here. You know, when you spend 18 years in broadcasting, you don't have to look at the people. And here you are. Well, I thought it was kind of a snoozer myself to learn about the Presbyterian Church in Neenah. So I'm so pleased so many of you came. I hope I get enough fruits and vegetables to feed me for the next week. Anyway, we're going to go a little beyond the Presbyterian Church. We're going to talk about the early churches here, but I can't plunk them down in the middle of you without you understanding the content, the history around them. So I promised Mike I would be out of here by 10:30 or 11, and I keep my promise. So we're going to start about 10,000 years ago. You thought I was kidding, didn't you? This is quick. Okay, and about 10,000 years ago, there was an ice cap covering Canada and the upper area of the United States. Keewatin ice sheet there, and the Labrador lobe here. Now, the Labrador was what affected Wisconsin. And as it receded back into Canada, it left us, and this, we should point this out very quickly. Now, I look at several maps, and they're all different, so I don't know how far down it really did not go. But the southwestern part of the state was left open, what we call the driftless area. And as you go down there, you see deep valleys and rolling hills, the beautiful area of the state. So anyway, when the ice sheet retreated back into Canada, it gave us the Great Lakes, Lake Winnebago, Fox River, Poygan, who knows how many little rivers, streams, and that sort of thing up in the northern lakes, up in the northern part of the state. So we're going to talk now about the early 30s, 1830s. In this area, all there were wandering trappers, traders, and the Menominee Indians, and some Winnebagos as well. Now, the federal government was very concerned back in the 1830s, 1820s, 1830s, because the migration of the whites was coming. The Indians knew it, federal government was trying to prepare. So they wanted to get ready for that migration. But they knew also that the Indians would be suffering their culture. They were losing it because of the gifts we had given them. Smallpox and watered down whiskey. So they were losing their culture because as the whites moved in. So they wanted to move them west. Now the Menominee land stretched all the way from Lake Michigan to the headwaters of the Mississippi. So in 1831, see if this is no, I don't want to go there yet. I'll be back. So in 1831, well, I got a better one over there. You can look at that later. So in 1831, the federal government treated with the Indians. And the Indians ceded land from the Fox River over to Lake Michigan, about 2.5 million acres. Their chief, Oshkosh, the brave one, said, you got to do me a favor. We'll give you the land for a price, but you've got to help my families, my people. They're going to need to know how to live with the white man. So they agreed that they would build a mission to teach the Indians how to live like the white man, or at least get along with him and know his culture. So they built the mission, and it was built at a place. Now I didn't mention this, and I should, and it's important. In addition to the Great Lakes and all the rest of it, they gave us an island, and you're all familiar with the island. Now, because of the lay of the land, water came out of Lake Winnebago, rushed around the north and south sides of that island. There were rapids. I mean, there was a lot of force coming there because the drop from Lake Winnebago down to Green Bay was 163 feet. Now, to give you some perspective, Niagara Falls is 173 feet, just 10 feet higher than this drop from here to Green Bay, about 40 miles. So that was water power, and that was really the genesis of all of the work that came here later. The flouring mills, the paper companies, they needed. Remember, we didn't get electricity here until 1890, give or take, 4 years before the White House got some anyway. At any rate, so you had to depend, if you had machinery to operate, you had to depend on water power. Okay, so the federal government started the mission. Now, I think I got one of these. Right up here is Fritzie Park. It just dropped my mind. When you get old, it does that. So it extended 563 acres from Fritzie Park along Little Lake Butamore, down through what is now downtown Neenah, out to the Kimberly Point. The plan was to build 5 farmhouses, 2-story farmhouses, with extensions. There, the blue ones, here and here. 4 of them were for the farmers who were to come here to teach the Indians how to farm. The other one was the workmen who came to build, back, was here, the grist mill. Some days you can't make $1,000. Okay, so they built the 5 buildings, and I started to say the men that built the grist mill and the sawmill were housed in the 5th building. They also were to put together about 3 dozen smaller homes, and that's the one I just showed you briefly, block houses. They were single-family homes for the families, the Indian families, who were coming here to learn about the white man. So this was the layout, 563 acres from Fritzie Park all the way out to the point. That was 1834. Now, it never did go very well. First of all, these Indians were nomads. They were hunter-gatherers, and they ranged their whole property with the seasons. Plenty of game out there, lots of bushes with berries on them. Good place to live. So that was one thing that didn't work. The second thing that didn't work was the smallpox. And it wiped out many members of many of the families. Those that were not affected left town. They headed for the hills. They went to Oshkosh, actually, and started a village down along the water down there. Now, in 1831, the first treaty, as I told you, was 2.5 million acres from the Fox River to Lake Michigan. Now, the last thing that killed the whole project was the second treaty, and that was called the Treaty of the Cedars. And that was in 1836, and at that point, the Indians sold another 4 million acres from the west side of the river, Fox River, to the start of the Mississippi. This is the blockhouse. Now I have to stop here for a minute. So here's the land. It's lying there, 563 acres, and it just lay fallow till 1843, when the federal government finally got back to thinking about it. But I have to introduce a fellow by the name of James Doty right now. You probably have heard his name once or twice. Jim Doty was born in 1799, and in 1820, he was clerk of court. He was an attorney by that time, and he was clerk of court for the Michigan Territory, which included the upper and lower Michigan and the area that was to become Wisconsin. And in 1820, the territorial governor, a man by the name of Lewis Cass, Brigadier General Lewis Cass, decided they didn't know diddly squat about what was on the west side of the lake, Lake Michigan. So he mounted an expedition. Young Doty quits his job as clerk of court and joins the expedition as secretary. Now we'll fast forward a little bit, and they end up by Lake Winnebago, and the end of the island. And Doty sees the island. It's beautifully treed. It's got hardwoods, softwoods. It's gorgeous. This whole area, in fact, was treed. It was a beautiful country. And he saw that water running down the north and the south side of that island. He said, there's potential here. And he said, I'm going to build myself a house here someday. And indeed, 25 years later, in 1845, he did build a house here. His wife dubbed it the Grand Loggery. A little more about Doty. He never lost sight of this. He moved a lot of different places in his work, and he never lost sight of this area because he really wanted to come back here. He was the main charge for us to become a territory among ourselves, Wisconsin Territory. He was the main pusher. Later, he was the main pusher when we became a state in 1848. It was Jim Doty again. I have to tell you, Jim, let's say that his moral compass lacked a magnet. Let's put it that way. So Jim Doty, the first territorial capital was at Belmont. Now, Belmont was in the southwestern part of the state, and it was not near any of the major population centers, Green Bay, Milwaukee, Racine. And the other thing that struck against it was that the legislators decided it didn't have near the accoutrements that they thought they deserved. So they cast about for another place. Enter Jim Doty. Jim says there's a beautiful place. It's a strip of land between two lakes down in the southern part of the state. You really ought to look at it. So they went over and they looked at it. And decided that was a good place. So they started deliberating whether that was indeed the place. And to hurry the process, I'll tell you this confidentially, Jim had bought land down there. So to spur the process, he gave key plots of land to some of the movers and shakers in the legislature, and you will be surprised to know that that's how we got Madison. So now you know a little about Jim Doty, and he'll come back and see us later. So in 1843, the government decided to put the the mission land up for sale. Now, Doty wanted to sell it to a friend of his, Harrison Reed, who was the editor of a newspaper called the Sentinel down in Milwaukee. And I think probably that Harrison Reed had visions of him being a town starter. At any rate, so Jim wanted to sell it to Harrison for $600, and the government said, no, we're going to do something else with it. We're going to put it up for bid. So I think what happened here, and I'll change the name so you know this isn't history, this is just the gospel according to Jack. I think James Doty went down and talked to his old friend, Harrison Reed. He said, Harry, he said, why don't you bid on that property? Oh, Jimmy, you know, I don't have any money, and I'd love to own the property, but I don't have any money. Nah, don't worry about the money. When people come in here on the migration and they start to see this land, they see the potential here, the trees, it's going to be beautiful. There's going to be somebody with money who's going to want to get in on the deal. So Harrison reluctantly bids $4,760 for the land. To his chagrin, he did win. So he goes to the government. He says, I got the property, but I don't have any money. What am I going to do? Well, you get a bondsman to insure the land. This is usually done in that sort of situation. We'll give you 3 years to find the money, and then we'll tack a little interest on it afterward, toward the end. Now, enter Orson P. Clinton. Oh, the government said that you've got to take possession of the land. You can't sell any land. You can't sell any buildings. Anything that isn't tacked down is yours to sell. You go there, take possession of the land. It's overgrown. The buildings are not looking too good either. So I have to introduce you to the Reverend Orson P. Clinton, traveling UCC minister, preached in the area. He had a preaching circuit from here, usually for about a month. He'd preach up here for about a month or a few days and then come back in the next month. The southern part of his area was down in Waukesha, just west of Milwaukee. And down in Waukesha was a man by the name of Loyal Jones. He and his brother-in-law, Perrine Yale, owned a dry goods store down there. And he had repeated to Jones many times, to Clinton many times, if you find some decent land that's got some promise, let me know. I've got a brother out east, he's got money, and he wants to start a town way out west. And we were way out west at that time. So Loyal comes up to look at the land, and he finds it suitable. He talks to Harrison Reed, and they like each other, they like the land. So he calls his brother out east in New York. He had a glove factory out in Gloverstown, New York. So he had money. So Jones, in turn, introduces his brother Harvey to Harrison. He comes out here, and they strike a deal. Okay, 563 acres, 50-50. I'll pay off the debt, and we'll go to business as partners and build us a town here. Well, he's still running the factory, glove factory. He's traveling back and forth. For about 3 years, he's traveling back and forth. And they can't agree. He comes out here, there's always something wrong. They were in court off and on for the whole 3 years. And then, so he had his money man, but there were problems. So they fought in and out of court continuously. Meantime, Curtis Reed, Harrison's brother, and Doty are building a town called Menasha, just north of us here. Okay, so there was trouble from the start, in and out of the court. Then 3 years later, Jones dies. He's on his way home to pick up his family, bring them back here and live down here and run management on site. So Jones dies. He didn't have a will. He had kids, and I can't believe this, but it's true. The two of them, Harrison Reed and Harvey Jones, never platted the land. These sections are yours, these sections are mine. So, back in court. Judge says, okay, we're going to have to wait for the kids to grow up so they can legally make a decision. Well, that finally did happen, and it took some years, and I can't, in anything I wrote, I read probably 10 or 12 different histories. Anyway, things did get settled ultimately, and in 1844, during this period, Harrison starts the Neenah Post Office, and he calls it Neenah. And that's of course, most people know the Winnebago name for water. Menasha is the Winnebago name for island. Okay, things are settled. Clinton starts, now we're into the churches. It didn't take long, did it? Well, we got lots of time. So Clinton decides to move here, and he, in April of 1847, signs the paper with the National Church and gets himself a United Church of Christ here in Neenah, Wisconsin. Now, there is one mention of a Methodist minister coming here in 1845 and conducting a service. There was no church at that point. This was the first physical church, chartered and everything. And everybody in town came to the service for this Methodist minister had, all 7 of them. So when Clinton established this church, his first service, he had 12 people there. So we're gaining on it. Now, I have to tell you the resolutions of the UCC Church. I have to tell you this. The Congregationalists, UCC, and the Presbyterians are in lockstep. Their teachings are very similar. The history of the government is a little different, but they believe pretty much the same way. And here's what the resolution of the UCC Church was. The Christian Sabbath is one of the pillars of our civil and religious institutions. The use of intoxicating liquor is wholly inconsistent with Christian character, and American slavery was a sin. Well, the Presbyterians believe the same thing. I won't bore you with all theirs because we do committees, and when you do a committee, you get a lot more words. So then, the state comes along the next year, 1848, May of 1848, and we got a state. December of that year, December 15th, 1848, entered the Reverend H.M. Robertson, who is from the Home Mission, and he establishes, some of the people want to be Presbyterians. So he establishes a church, does all the paperwork, and here we are. We've got 2 churches now. We've got a UCC church, and we've got a Presbyterian church. They had 18 at their service. This is a map of the early area, and if I don't screw things up here, this is where Harrison Reed lived in one of those farmhouses out by Kimberly Point. Nice choice, huh? The UCC church was first in a school, and then later they moved out to East Doty Avenue, out in here. Now, the Presbyterians had, up until that time, been out at Loyal's home out here, Loyal Jones's home. He and his brother-in-law moved up here and started a dry goods store, which was right here. These are too close together. Okay, we'll get there. Okay, here we are. The dry goods store was right here. You remember the railroad tracks that ran north and south in front of the hotel and on the west side of Shattuck Park? So there's their dry goods store. And they stayed there for some time, but in 1851, they decided they needed a church, a physical church. So they built one on East Wisconsin Avenue, roughly across the street from the Double House. That was the general area. And the UCC church was right around the block. There was just a fence between them. Their backyards were pretty close together. So this was the church they built. And that served them well until 1870. Now, I have to tell you about old school and new school. The Presbyterian church nationally split. Now, one of the things about the Presbyterian church, we're very big on education. So we attracted people who had done well. In the South, the church was old school. Now, old school means before you were born, God decided what you were going to be, a sinner or saved. You didn't have a choice. So it was decided already. The new school folks come along and they say, wait a minute, we've got free will. We ought to be able to make our own decision. So that was the first thing that split. A little discussion, intramural discussion there. And of course the South was for slavery, and many of our members were landowners and slaveholders. In the North, abolitionists, we hated slavery. Remember the principles of the UCC Church? So okay, they split. About 25 people from the Neenah Church, which was old school, the one on Wisconsin Avenue, split and joined the UCC Church. And the combined church decides they're going to be Presbyterians. They're going to be the second Presbyterian Church of Neenah. Okay. Now this was the little church that the UCC Church had, and when those 25 came over, it started to get crowded, and it got more crowded as they went. So at some point in time, they went and bought land west of town, the western end of town, and built this church. That land, by the way, and I'll tell you right now, is a parking lot now across the west to the west of a Presbyterian church, south of West Gore Funeral Home. That parking lot belongs to the Presbyterian Church. We bought that in 1865. So they built this little wooden church, complete with steeple, bell tower, and they had clocks all the way around, very fancy, very nice. So Second Presbyterian Church did business there until 1868. And the two ministers, First Presbyterian, Second Presbyterian, got together. Now, you've got to understand that in the Presbyterian Church, ministers are not members of the church. They are teaching elders. We have what we call a session of ruling elders. So they lobbied their separate sessions and said, you know, this is crazy. Here we are, two churches, Presbyterian churches. We ought to get back together. So they lobbied the two sessions. We set up committees. We do that. We set up committees at each of the churches, and their job was to find common ground, which they did. So it was old school, new school come together as the First Presbyterian Church. Now we don't have a Second Presbyterian Church, we've got a First Presbyterian Church, okay? And that's the building. Same building with a few changes. First of all, up here, the clocks are gone. I don't know why they got rid of the clocks, but they blew out the center, increased the size, blew it out two ways, built a little house here for Sunday school and so on. Because they were, with the two churches, they needed a lot of space. And this was good until after 1868, and it got too small again. So they decided they had to build a bigger church. What are they going to do? Well, the session decided they would demolish this church and build this church. Beautiful brick church, same land. It's the old parking lot here again. And they built this church. Very austere, very Presbyterian, very nice. And this served them well until 1951. From 1901 until 1951. Now, when the two churches combined, the two ministers, one of the ministers left. He became a missionary, I think. The other one ultimately became president of a college someplace. And enter in 1870, the Reverend John Chapin. Now, if you were here last month and you attended Tom Hoare's presentation about the brigade, you know that John Chapin and one of his congregation, S.F. Shattuck, brought the brigade here from Europe. He was a doer. He was a doer. So here we are. 1934. I almost forgot that. Mrs. Babcock gave the church an Aeolian Skinner organ. Is that right, Paul? Aeolian Skinner? I don't know whether it's pronouncing it right. Top of the line. Beautiful, beautiful organ. In fact, we still have it in the new church over here. So it's been around since 1934. It's interesting for you Presbyterians, you might recognize this from the little chapel. This is essentially, they brought a lot of things over from the other church. Okay, so this was given in memory of her husband. Fanny gave this as in remembrance of Henry Kimberly Babcock. Incidentally, when we mentioned the name Babcock, 3 of the 4 founders of Kimberly-Clark were Presbyterians. Kimberly, Babcock, and Shattuck. Not S.F. Shattuck, his dad. Okay, so it's the late 40s. People are coming back from the war. We're starting to get a lot of people moving into this area. There's a lot of industry going on here, Millingville and so on, the paper companies primarily. So they decide they have to build a new building, and so they buy some land across the street from the parking lot, from the old church, and they decide to do it in 2 stages. There'd be an education, fellowship, and chapel. And then the second stage would be the sanctuary itself. Now this is a look down on our existing operation. Thank you, Google. Here's the education building. They had the offices, the education building, and fellowship hall for bigger meetings, potlucks, and that sort of thing. And then you can just see a part of the little chapel that was built. This is the sanctuary right here, and I'll tell you what happened there. So anyway, this is a picture of the construction of the first phase. That was dedicated in 1951. And that would be the education wing, fellowship hall, and the little chapel. And later, they built the second, let me go back. They built the second phase, which was the sanctuary, and you saw that in the foreground. That was dedicated in 1954. So now we have the church that you're familiar with, and across the street is the parking lot. There's Westcore up there. So are you all oriented? You all understand where we are? Okay. Now I took this picture a few weeks ago. The bell choir was practicing. This lady down here in the foreground, I'm not going to use this thing anymore, it scares me. She's always there at least a half hour early. And as long as I can remember, she's done that. The other gals the choir must have been through practicing because I see one of the choir members down there. See that, I'm going to try it. See this baptismal font, okay? The boys brought that over from the old church across the street, and they decided to roll it over. Well, when it chipped a couple of times, they decided that was probably not a great idea. So they loaded it into a wagon and brought it over. Yeah, I don't know if you can tell, but it's 8-sided, and it hasn't moved in that spot since. Nobody wants to touch it. I have to tell you about Reverend Chapin. You know about 1900 when the brigade was established. Incidentally, Tom, I didn't know this, Tom told us last month that the brigade is now the brigade. It's not the Boys and Girls Brigade anymore. It will now be the brigade. And it is the largest brigade in the world, 750 kids. Okay, the Reverend Chapin, he was a doer. You remember the Great Chicago Fire, October 7th, 1871. 150 to 300 people dead. They really don't know because they didn't find very many of them. 2,000 acres lost, 100,000 homeless. At the same time, a raging fire went through Peshtigo. Of course, Chicago got the press. And you know it's left after you get the press. Look at the 1,500 to 2,500 people dead. 1.2 million acres gone. 12 towns totally destroyed. John Chapin contacted the folks in Peshtigo, and he said, he talked to other ministers in town, and the folks here opened their homes to those people who were homeless up at Peshtigo as a result of this forest fire. Some 68 families came down here and lived in our homes for quite some time until they could get back on their feet. But that was him. So, we're at the end now, and I want to tell you a story. Remember the 3 principles of UCC Church, and they are essentially the same as the Presbyterian. Church is good, booze is bad, so is slavery. To this day, when we celebrate the sacraments, we use grape juice. We don't drink any liquor. Well, to illustrate the point, two things. We have in this city an ordinance that says no liquor in city parks. Now, I don't know the genesis of that ordinance, but I gotta believe there were Presbyterians and UCC involved in the, take it one step farther and then I'll quit and let you go. A young man came to town, wanted to build a brewery. So he thought it would be smart politics to talk to some of the head honchos. So he ran into Jack Kimberly. He said, Mr. Kimberly, he said, where would be a good place for a brewery? Jack looked at him with a steely eye and said, in hell, sir, in hell. So the march goes on. And that's the story of the Presbyterian and the UCC churches, which are one and the same. It's the same. Thank you very much. You've been a great audience. There's probably time, I guess there's plenty of time, for questions, comments, refutes. Anyone have any comments, questions? Yeah, Terry.
Were there any fires? I thought I heard some stories about fires.
Here, in this area?
Yeah.
I'm not aware of any, and history...
The Methodist Church burned.
Oh, maybe that was it.
The what? Oh, the Methodist Church. I didn't tell you that. The Methodist Church bought the Presbyterian. They moved in here in 1849, and they bought the First Presbyterian Church. They lived there for quite a while, in fact. And that did burn, you're right. Thanks, Francis. Other questions, comments?
And where was the fire department?
Right across
Fire-
from the Methodist Church.
Yeah, right across from the old post office. Well, the clock tower, that was City Hall, that was the fire department, that was the police department. They were all right there in that building. And then some years ago, they wanted to tear it down and we saved the clock tower. And we make good use of it too. No, I supported that. Us historians, we don't let anything like that. Paul, did you have your hand up?
Maybe you mentioned this earlier, but the connection between us and the brigade in Onaway Island.
Oh, I didn't. And the Onaway is a little fuzzy in my mind, but the brigade in Europe, one of the prerequisites to belonging to the brigade was that you had to attend church every week. And that was a part of it here in the early years. Now we don't do that anymore, I guess. Onaway was owned by somebody. You know the story, Paul? You want to talk about it?
It's my understanding, correct me, for those of you who've been around here longer, that we used to own Onaway Island.
Right.
We sold the island to the brigade back in the 50s.
Mr. Shattuck bought that island from whoever it was, and so we owned, the church owned it, yes.
Yeah, it sold it for $1, I think, to the brigade back in the 50s. I think that's what, is that right for you? Is that right?
And so the brigade was out there.
Presbyterian.
Terry owned it, and then Frank bought it from the Presbyterian.
Okay, so and then the brigade now, of course, goes out there all the time. And makes good use of the island. Anything else? Okay.
What's the, what size of your congregation now versus the older?
When Joyce and I came here in '67, it was about 1,500. And we just got a new number, about 750, I think now, Paul. 750, 800. Yeah. Some of us come twice, so we can look the numbers up. Kind of works out okay. But yeah, I think about 750. Well, we have some new members coming in. That'll push us back toward 800 again. It's a large church for 800 people, let me tell you. And you can't believe how much it costs to heat and light that sucker. But it's a beautiful building. And hopefully we won't have to build another one for a while. Well, thank you very much. Good audience. I appreciate your time. Enjoy.
Thank you so much for coming. I'd just like to make you aware of this booklet that the Historical Society produced. It's based on a cookbook from 1908 of the Presbyterian women. It's a lot of fun. We did some bios of the various women who submitted recipes to that cookbook, so you can take a look at it over on the table. Thank you very much for coming.
Now, let me tell you a couple of quick things here. This stirred my mind, I forgot to mention. Some of the histories I did, Cunningham, who was the Gazette editor in the newspaper in town, did a history in 1878, 79. He was not a good reporter, but you get a lot of stuff out of there. There's a lot of stuff that's not exactly true, but it's good history. Then in the 50s, S.F. Shattuck headed up a committee to do a total history of this area, right down to the fraternal organizations, the churches. Your church is in there someplace. It's a great book. And then not too long ago in the 90s, there was a third book of history done, and it's the tale of two cities, the Twin Cities. And if you want a nice read, it's easy reading and it's good stuff. Most of it's pretty accurate, so that's a good thing. In addition to that, I looked at the history of Winnebago County. I looked at the history of northern Winnebago County, and I went to Doty's wiki spot and read about him and so on. So there's lots of good history out there, and if you're interested in history. Now over here somewhere, there's a white sheet, 10 lessons of history. I took a course developed by a man by the name of Rufus, it doesn't matter, professor of history at the University of Oklahoma. And he predicated each chapter, each lecture on these 10 points. So if you're interested in history, pick up one. They're free, and they'll give you something to think about. They're very interesting. The first point, the first lesson of history is that we do not learn from history. Thank you.
Very nice to see you too.
Is that okay? Yes. Hi, David. How are you?